What is going on, guys? This is Michael Williams from Cartoon Universe, and today I wanted to talk about something that I've been kind of thinking about for a while, as you can tell by the title. Wanted to just kind of discuss a little bit about the lack of super story-driven shows in Western animation. I'm, of course, joined with Haley.
Hey, everyone.
So, to start off, like I said, I wanted to talk about the lack of story-driven shows in animation. As far as Western animation goes, I've noticed sort of a trend when it comes to cartoons. It seems as though the networks are kind of afraid of, just kind of focusing more on a story, more mature themes. Obviously, we have shows like Steven Universe, which we all love, but even Steven Universe can sometimes be guilty of, diverting away from the actual plot. Just to clarify before, because I can already see the pitchforks in the comments, I'm not saying that it's a bad thing. I'm not saying that those episodes are bad. I love those episodes. Like, there's probably only one or two episodes in the entire series that I don't like. But, it does get kind of frustrating at times. We can all admit that when, they kind of delve away from the plot, when they have this huge lore and huge world, huge story and stuff like that. Star versus the Force of Evil is another one where, there's a lot of interesting characters and story like Toffee, and they just don't really utilize it to its full potential. So what are your initial thoughts on this, Haley?
Yeah, I totally agree. Especially like at the current time period. Right now, what we're seeing is that many shows often, kind of have a plot, but it's often put on standstill after something happens or until the very end of the season, or the build up to it is very slow and you have to get through like 20-30 episodes to finally see some action going on, which is a bit disappointing. It seems to be like more common now than ever, compared to like 10 years or recently, but it's kind of disappointing to see, in my opinion.
Yeah, like the only ones that kind of pop into my head, which I haven't watched fully, are like the Marvel shows that are out right now, the Marvel animated shows like Spider-Man and Avengers. But from what I gather, those shows aren't super well written, unfortunately. And then we have the new Justice League action show coming out, which has like a lot of the same voice actors from the original DC animated universe, which we'll get to in a second. But this show, I'm not sure what this show is trying to be based on the trailer. I'm not sure how many of you have seen it, but there's like super actiony music, but the art style is very like cartoony, and there's a lot of like weird timed comedy and borderline parody stuff. So I'm not really sure what that show is supposed to be. And another point to bring up, as if these shows are plot related, they're already existing properties, so they kind of have more leeway. The only show I can think of in recent memory is like Avatar and Korra. And while Avatar was a huge success, Korra kind of wasn't treated very right by the network. They got kind of pushed to the side and put on the internet. Granted, there was quite a few gruesome deaths, especially in season 3, so that may have been part of the reason. But it's just weird to see. And even going back to the 90s, most of the shows, and they were amazing shows, like 90s Nick, 90s Cartoon Network, brilliant shows, but none of them were super story-driven. Like, the most we probably got was, like, Hey Arnold, and that wasn't even super story-driven to begin with. We did, of course, have the DC animated universe and, like, Gargoyles and stuff like that. But again, these were already existing properties. Oh, I guess Gargoyles wasn't.
No, it was brand new. Yeah.
So Gargoyles was an exception, but again, we just haven't really seen anything like this in quite a while.
Yeah, well, currently, the one show that I think of when I think of like an action show is Voltron. That's a new one that is really action oriented. But like you were saying with some other ones, Voltron is a reboot and of an existing property, so it probably does have more leeway with what it could do. Reboots either go two ways, either like extremely all the way silly and redo the whole entire show, or they actually get serious, which is cool to see. And which is the thing with Voltron. So, but that's like the only one that I can think of right now that's like totally action oriented. At the moment.
Yeah, and I think this kind of stems from going back to like the history of cartoons. They initially began as like introductions before a movie at films, and they were more adult oriented. And then around like 70s, 80s or so, they started making more cartoons for television, they were planning on selling merchandise, and they were going to sell the merchandise to kids, so toys and clothes and all that stuff, like Transformers and Ninja Turtles. And I think around this era-ish is when, you know, it started becoming a stigma, and it started, you know, being known as something that's only for kids. And I think what's happening here is the networks are kind of afraid to kind of branch away from that. They kind of did it in the 90s, had a lot of adult humor and stuff like that, but again, it was just mostly comedy. And in the 80s, a lot of the action shows, you know, looking back, they don't hold up as well. So even just during that era, there wasn't a lot of very super story driven, mature, well written animated shows, and it's a real shame because there's a lot of potential in a lot of different shows. Looking back at like Teen Titans, very story driven, very character driven, very well written show, and then they just kind of ended it. It got canceled. We never really got a solid conclusive ending, and then we get a reboot, which it proves my point even more. It's just random, goofy, nonsensical comedy that is catering to the kids, and the kids love it. It's a huge cash cow right now. So I think the networks are kind of floating off of the, you know, oh, lol, so random craze that's going on right now in cartoons, and they're kind of afraid to dive into something a little more mature. Even some of the more mature shows kind of have that at times.
Yeah, it's pretty much impossible, almost impossible nowadays to find a fully like action oriented or plot oriented cartoon. And if they are, you know, they'll be like something like Voltron, where it's that style. Because a lot of shows don't really seem to know like 100% what they want to be, like in terms of at one point they're all silly and stuff, but then they do get a plot. But eventually they kind of want to go back to what like the beginning was, so a little bit more random, which doesn't always work. That's what I think, at least.
Yeah, like going back to Steven Universe, like it started off pretty goofy, pretty random, you know, fun, but there were like little hints of lore around, and then as the series progressed, it got a little more serious. We started to learn more darker things about the series and the backstory of certain characters, and then it kind of sways back and forth between that and then the fun stuff. Again, still perfectly fun, still like one of my favorite shows of all time, and it actually is an interesting dynamic to see, you know, Steven just going about his daily life, because he's not going to be fighting gems and stuff, you know, every single day. So it is kind of interesting to see that dynamic, and like when he's fighting for Earth, you kind of get a perspective of what he's fighting for, you know. But it like I said, it can get frustrating. And pretty much every like good show that's come from the, as they call, the animation renaissance, has had something like this. Like Gravity Falls was kind of like this. Star versus the Forces of Evil was kind of like this. To my knowledge, I think Adventure Time was kind of like this. Neither of us have actually watched Adventure Time, but we've heard that the recent seasons aren't as good as they used to be. But we can neither confirm nor deny this. But regular show was episodic. Gumball was episodic. Great shows. But it's just kind of disappointing to see a lack of diversity in this realm. And what's really interesting is that anime is kind of the opposite. Whereas when I think of anime, I think of mostly action-oriented and or story-driven shows that are actually pretty adult and mature. There's cursing and blood and gore and all this. They're not really afraid to step out of bounds, if you will. And obviously we have a big anime market in the West, but what does that say for new creators in the West, in America, who, you know, don't speak Japanese, that, you know, might have certain shows? Like me, I have quite a few animation ideas for animated shows that I would like to do, but I'm not sure what platform I would even be able to go about it, because I don't see any networks really having any shows that would pertain to the audience that I'm aiming for. And then you can say, oh, we'll just go to Japan and make it an anime, but then that's like, all right, well, now I have to learn Japanese. I have to go to Japan.
Probably, yeah.
And like usually how anime goes, there's the manga first, so you'd have to get a manga published and then make sure that's popular and making money, and then you have to make the show, and then you have to also make the manga, which is usually ahead of the show. So then it's like, well, what if you don't want to do that system? Because that's typically what happens about 80-90% of the time. And, you know, on the opposite side of the spectrum, adult Western animation is, again, all comedies. You know, you got the Family Guys, Bob's Burgers, Rick and Morty, South Park. Again, all good shows, but, you know, there's not a lot of diversity, just all comedies. The only slight exception, South Park, for the last 2 seasons has been kind of story driven, but again, it's still a comedy, and it's mostly a social commentary show at the end of the day. But yeah, like as you were saying with Voltron, that's on Netflix. I feel like Netflix may be the saving grace for the creators who want to put more story driven, action oriented, mature themed animated shows that might be a little more adult. But there's still not a lot in Netflix right now. It's mostly anime, and all the adult animation is cartoons. But I feel like this is going to be or the adult animation is mostly comedy, but I feel like Netflix could be a good platform if someone could just grab a hold of it. So I'm not really sure what's next for Western animation. Are we going to get more, adult action story driven shows? Is it going to remain like this? Like, what do you think could like kind of change the tide?
Well, I mean, looking at it now, like what we see for upcoming shows for Cartoon Network especially, it doesn't seem like things are changing. In fact, it's gonna lose the shows kind of, or it's going towards that, losing the shows that we were holding dear to, like, oh, they actually did have some plot. But for the future, I mean, like you said, Netflix could be are the best option, or like places like Hulu or Amazon, where they stream videos, or movies and such. But of course, like I'm looking at the pilots, and all of them, every single one of them, doesn't look like it's going to be for that. And a lot of the cartoons especially are for like preschoolers, which you're never going to see plot for like 99% of them. So right now I don't really know what to think, just hoping that eventually we'll get some kind of reemergence of plot driven shows.
Yeah, and just to clarify again, like we're not hating on the shows that are out. We just kind of would like to see a little bit more diversity in this front. But what do you guys think? Do you think we missed any points? You agree with any points? Let us know in the comments down below. Again, I've been Michael Williams, joined with Haley. You've been watching Cartoon Universe, and we will see you in the next video. Peace.
Bye.